10. The hit-and-run doctor. On Highway 99 in Florida, near the Manning Avenue exit in Fresno County, Juliana Ramos was killed. It was February 10th, and somebody in a Hyundai Elantra had just smashed into a big rig. It was absolute pandemonium. Juliana just so happened to be a doctor who saw the whole thing go down. Being a good person and all, she stopped and pulled her car over on the median and got out to help. Both the driver of the Hyundai and the big rig suffered major injuries and were in need of medical assistance. This is where everything turned bad. According to the Highway Patrol, Juliana was then hit by a red SUV. As she was trying to provide medical assistance, the driver of the SUV ran her over and then kept going. They didn't stop to check. They didn't even slow down. They just sped off as if nothing had happened. The 26-year-old cardiologist was left dead in the road. Luckily, an anonymous tip led the police to James Comazzi, a 68-year-old man and the one responsible for killing the helpful doctor. The police tracked him down to his home in Sonora, where they discovered the red SUV. He was arrested and booked on vehicular homicide, though he later posted a $15,000 bond and was released. He's scheduled to appear back in court this January, though it's unclear right now what kind of sentence he'll get for the murder. What kind of punishment do you think he should get? Let us know in the comments below. 9. Kidnapped in Brazil. In Brazil, a 19-year-old student was kidnapped and murdered by a convicted sex offender who posed as a good Samaritan to trick her. The body of Mariana Braza was discovered dumped on a dirt track, a blindfold around her eyes, a gag in her mouth, and her hands tied behind her back. The university student vanished the morning before after leaving a gym 40 miles from where her body was discovered. Surveillance footage showed the murderer approaching her and asking if she needed help with a flat tire. But this was no normal flat tire. It had been slashed by Rodrigo Pereira Alves, the man who would kill her later that night. The last time she was seen alive was on the security footage, driving her vehicle into a yard on the other side of the street. This was presumably where the fake Good Samaritan was going to fix it. Shortly after, her car is seen driving away, but Mariana is no longer behind the wheel. This guy had absolutely no chance of getting away with the murder. Even as he was fixing her tire, she took a picture of him and sent it to her family. Mariana must have known in her gut that this guy was bad news. It's just too bad she didn't listen to that screaming intuition and run back into the gym to call the police while she still had the chance. 8. The worst Good Samaritans. Sometimes it's the Good Samaritans themselves that are actually out to get you. In Tennessee, police were recently searching for a couple of what you might call bad Samaritans after a man and a woman helped change a guy's tire just to steal his car. According to the police report, the victim in this situation got a flat tire while driving down the interstate at about 4:30 in the morning. This is definitely the worst possible time to be stranded anywhere, especially by yourself. A man and a woman pulled over in a blue minivan to give him a hand. They helped change the tire, the driver agreed to buy the pair a meal as a thank you, and they followed him to the nearest gas station. But when the man went into the gas station, that was when the thieves jumped into action. He was in the process of literally buying them a meal for helping him when the woman jumped into his driver's seat and took off. The other thief drove the blue minivan after her, stranding the poor guy at the gas station with enough food for 3 people. We don't know exactly how this case ended. The Memphis Police Department did say that they found the stolen vehicle, but as for those responsible, these bad Samaritans are still loose and at large. 7. Breaking up the wrong fight. A Good Samaritan stepped in to break up a fight that was going on in downtown Calgary, Canada. It happened at James Short Park around 7 o'clock at night back in June when a woman and a man got into an altercation. The man began to beat the woman up in the middle of the park, and she was screaming for him to stop. The Good Samaritan, like any half-decent human being, stepped between them to help the woman out. It really seemed like something that anybody with a conscience would have done in a similar situation, but the aggressor wasn't particularly happy about it. He took out a knife and stabbed the guy to death. Well, first, the Good Samaritan tried to make a run for it. He saw the blade and turned to run, but he tripped, hit the bumper of a car, and that was all it took for the killer to catch up. He grabbed the guy, plunged his knife into him, and then left him there bleeding in the park. He was transported to the hospital but died from his injuries. After a brief investigation, the police were able to identify the murderer as a 26-year-old male named Joel Gross Vintre Boy, but they weren't able to catch him right then. He's about 6'2". Police knew exactly what he looks like, and yet they couldn't track him down until September, a month after the stabbing. He's now been arrested and is awaiting trial. What do you think would be your response if you witnessed a man beating a woman up in the middle of a city park? And if you intervened and the man pulled a knife, what would your next move be? Let us know all about it in the comments below. And if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. 6. Shot by the cops. Johnny Hurley saved many lives the day that he was shot down and killed by a cop. Probably the worst payment he could have possibly received for being a good Samaritan. It was just past 1 o'clock in the afternoon on June 21st in the city of Arvada, Colorado. Officer Gordon Beasley responded to a complaint about a suspicious person roaming around. The officer was en route to the area when he saw the suspect park his truck and start to run. According to the police, the suspect was Ronald Troike, and he was armed with a 12-gauge semi-automatic shotgun. For absolutely no reason, Ronald ran up behind the officer and shot him twice, killing Gordon dead on the spot. Ronald then continued to fire off his weapon, shooting out the windows of cop cars and trying to kill anyone who got near him. He had snapped and was going crazy. Witnesses ran. People were ducking for cover. It was absolute craziness. It would be discovered later that Ronald had left behind a document saying that he was intending to go out by targeting police officers in the deadliest rampage possible. At some point during the shooting, Ronald went back to his truck and switched weapons. With his AR-15 locked and loaded, he was on his way to a busy commercial area when Johnny Hurley confronted him. Johnny, without hesitation, shot the man down with a handgun. His bravery by intervening probably meant that a lot of people survived what would have been an unimaginable killing spree. But when the police showed up, they saw Johnny with a gun in his hand and shot him dead. The hero was killed by the police before anyone even asked who he was. 5. Trying to save a cat. In New Hampshire, a Good Samaritan was killed while trying to save the life of a cat. I mean, really, what could be nobler than risking your own life to save that of a feline? Sadly, the identified person hadn't really thought things through. They were driving down on the street, on a rather busy road for that matter, when they saw the cat in distress. They stopped their car without thinking of the consequences, got out, and tried to grab the little ball of fuzz before it was run over by a vehicle. But they didn't act soon enough. A car smacked into the person, killing both them and the cat. Even though they were quickly transported to the hospital, there was nothing doctors could do. Stanford County Sheriff Mark Brave called what happened a freak accident. Nobody is going to be charged in the crash, seeing as the victim was dressed in dark clothing on a dark and busy road, and the driver of the car that hit them didn't even know it until it was too late. 4. Shooting the barber. A barber gave a guy a ride in South Jersey and wound up dead. The guy who killed him has been sentenced to 45 years in state prison. The victim was Miguel Lopez Jr., 53 years old. He was discovered on January 15th unresponsive in the front seat of a vehicle that had been involved in a crash. But Miguel wasn't dead from the crash. He was discovered with 4 bullet wounds. Police say he died on the scene as a result of massive blood loss from the gunshots. Somebody filled this guy full of lead and then fled the scene. That somebody has been identified as Hule Hana, already found guilty of murder in the first degree. From what the investigators were able to put together, Hule was at the site of the crash when Miguel saw him and stopped. Miguel thought he might need help and offered him a ride, but that offer would turn out to be fatal. They appeared to have gotten into some kind of argument when the car crashed, and Hule unloaded his gun on Miguel at close range, shooting him to death on the spot. 3. Picking up the tab. A Good Samaritan in Florida was shot to death at a Waffle House. There's nothing wrong with Waffle House, but it's probably not anyone's ideal choice for where they die. And what makes this case really bizarre is that the shooting stemmed from a fight that came because of one man's selfless generosity. It was 3 o'clock in the morning in Gainesville, arguably the best time to visit Waffle House. Craig Brewer, 41 years old, was feeling particularly generous that morning and offered to pay for the meals of people in the restaurant. He was basically handing out money, and that resulted in a verbal altercation with Ezekiel Hicks, 25 years old. Ezekiel Hicks was angry because Craig had yet to pay for his meal. He was paying other customers' tabs but hadn't picked up his. Just stop for a second and imagine getting angry enough to pull out a gun and shoot a man in the head because he didn't voluntarily pay for your meal at a restaurant. A man you'd never met in your life. Well, that's how mad Ezekiel was when he blew Craig's brains out the back of his head with a 9mm pistol. Ezekiel is now being held on charges of first-degree premeditated murder, a charge that will mean life in prison. 2. The Good Marine. Lance Corporal Alberto Lucio died on a California highway while helping victims of a car crash. The U.S. Marine, a kid of only 20 years old, stopped on the side of Interstate 5, just 55 miles from Mexico at 3 o'clock in the morning. He was trying to help a couple who stalled their SUV. They had been in an accident that left them with their lights disabled, and Alberto thought that he could give them some assistance. Sadly, an international box truck came out of nowhere and not only plowed through Alberto but crashed into the SUV. The driver of the vehicle came barreling down the road, not looking where he was going. The SUV wasn't even in the middle of the street. It was on the side of the road, and still the truck was able to crash into it and kill Alberto. The passenger in the truck was also injured, and the driver is now looking at a handful of felonies for what he's done. Colonel John Black, Alberto's commanding officer, said that he gave his life in the service of others and that his memory will be honored. Even at just 20 years old, Alberto had already earned the National Defense Service Medal and the Global War on Terrorism Medal. 1. Helpful construction workers. In North York, Toronto, a Good Samaritan was shot dead by the driver of a stolen vehicle. It happened on a Friday afternoon when a man stole a truck and began speeding eastbound in heavy traffic. The truck spun out of control. It crashed into a construction worker on the side of the road, hit the guardrail, and then plowed into a work truck. The people who witnessed the crash were construction workers. Doing the right thing, they ran to the pickup and tried to pull the driver from the vehicle. But this is where everything went terribly wrong. As the construction workers were trying to help, the man in the truck pulled out a gun and began firing at them. He fired 3 shots at the workers before they were able to overpower the man and take away his weapon. One of the Good Samaritans had to be rushed to the hospital with gunshot wounds, later pronounced dead. According to what the Toronto police said, the man had likely been trying to flee the scene and the Good Samaritans were getting in his way. He must have thought that firing his gun would make them back off, but it only made them angry. It's just a real shame that a man was left dead, all because a thief couldn't accept a bit of good-natured help. Thanks for watching. What's the worst thing you've ever seen happen to a Good Samaritan? Let us know in the comments below, and remember to hit subscribe for all the best videos from the channel. See you next time. Bye.